Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you the first of a two-part series on my kind of final 85mm Showdown. And I asked and I got permission to directly compare all of these lenses from the manufacturer, and so as a result I'm able to show you my results of how all four of these lenses that have been a part of my comparison series, how they shake out. Now in today's episode we're going to take a look at resolution, and if you've been following this series you may have a sense of how this is going to turn out, but I know that a lot of you have been interested in seeing how some of these others, I've been doing comparisons with the Canon, and I know that you're also interested in how some of these lenses compare to the other lenses, for example Tamron versus Sigma, or the Zeiss versus the Sigma and the Tamron along with the Canon. And so today I'm going to show you those results when it comes to resolution. In our second episode we're going to take a look and try to complete the picture, because there's more to any of these images than just raw resolution. In fact, in a focal length that is most often used for portraiture, just pure resolution doesn't always equal the absolute best as a portrait lens. And case in point, of course, is the very popular Canon 85mm f1.2L Mark II, which is not a part of this comparison. However, that lens has been treasured by some of the top portrait photographers for a long time because of the rendering that comes out of the lens, and also, of course, that unique subject isolation, very shallow depth of field you can achieve with an f1.2 lens. Now, none of these lenses that we're going to compare are f1.2, and all of them have at best an f1.4 maximum aperture, and in the case of the Tamron a little bit smaller f1.8 maximum aperture. But taking a look at these lenses when it comes to raw resolution, let's jump in and let's see how they compare, looking at them compared each with the other. So let's take a look. Okay, for the sake of brevity we're going to limit our comparisons here to some basic aperture values here, and so just taking again a look wide open. Corner performance, the Tamron of course is strong as we've seen before, and so f1.8 versus f1.4. There's no question that the Tamron is the stronger performer in the corners versus the Canon. In the center of the frame, I think that the Canon is pretty much as good as what the Tamron is. I don't see really any kind of major difference there, and so center of the performance, or center of the frame performance, is fairly good on the Canon. Now here wide open I've got the Sigma and the Zeiss Otis here, and so you can see that the Zeiss is guilty of the heaviest vignette, but it also is going to give us our strongest performance. So center of the frame, the Zeiss looks really fantastic. You can see much more contrast than what the Sigma has. In the center of the frame, Sigma is suffering a bit from chromatic aberrations, and so you can see just a general bit of veiling that's there. Moving off to the edge, however, and I think that the Sigma is get a little bit more even across the frame, and so as a result it's, depending on where you look, like here seems to me like the Zeiss is stronger than the Sigma. So looking towards the bottom, at the very edge they're roughly equal. Up here I would say toward the edge the Sigma looks a little bit stronger. If we move over towards the center, the Zeiss advantage starts to come back. Looking over at the other side, at the very edge, I think the Sigma looks a hair better. But then if we look towards the bottom half, the Zeiss looks a little bit better again. So these two are close. The Zeiss is the best in the center. And so just to give you an idea, wide open, if we compare the Tamron and the Zeiss, which are, our strongest performers in terms of contrast, we're going to find that the Zeiss is still the winner in the center of the frame in terms of its contrast. Moving off to the very edge of the frame where the Tamron is really strong, we see that the Tamron is delivering the stronger kind of edge performance, and looking over at the other side, the same is true there. Now if we compare the Tamron and the Sigma, just so you can kind of see all of these comparisons here. In the center of the frame, I think that the Sigma has the slightest edge. It's not really much, but I think that the Sigma is a little bit stronger in the center of the frame. If we move off towards the edge of the frame, In this comparison, I would say that the Sigma still looks a hair better, and of course that's at f1.4 versus f1.8. You know, and again, it's kind of a matter of where you look, and you know, in this area, the Tamron's a little bit stronger than what the Sigma is. Looking at the other side, right side, the Tamron is stronger than what the Sigma is. Now, if we compare at f2, we'll just do a quick comparison here. At f2, center of the frame, the performance of the Canon on the right, the Tamron on the left, is roughly equal at the center of the frame. Moving off to the edge of the frame, the Canon is looking a little bit better than what it did, but the Tamron is definitely still the stronger. In many ways, I think the Tamron gives the most consistent performance across the frame, with the Sigma maybe a close second. Zeiss is unquestionably the king in the center of the frame. And over here on the right side also, the Tamron's looking a little bit stronger. Now if we compare the Otis with the Sigma in the center of the frame, we can definitely see that now the Otis is like just stunningly sharp, and this at f2, the Sigma is being outclassed by the higher optical performance, at least in the center of the frame of the Otis. Looking up in this area, you can still see some advantage for the Otis in terms of its contrast and resolving power. However, if we move off to the very edge of the frame, just right at that last tiny percentage, I would say that the Sigma is stronger. Even moving down towards the center of the frame, the Zeiss looks stronger to me there. Right side, it's basically the same story. You know, Zeiss has the advantage right up until like the last, 2% of the edge of the frame. So if we compare the Tamron with the Zeiss, mostly kind of looking at comparisons that we haven't previously made, you see a similar story to that of the Sigma, where the center contrast is definitely stronger, no question about it, and thus resolving power is higher on the Zeiss lens, and that micro contrast that we discussed in that episode, you can definitely see on display here. Looking off to the edge of the frame, we can see that the Tamron and the Zeiss performance at f2 is close at the edge of the frame. However, if we move down here towards the center of the frame, you can see the superior micro contrast of the Zeiss lens. Moving off to the right side, it's kind of the same story with the Tamron as it was with the Sigma. The Tamron is advantage at the edge of the frame, stretches maybe a little bit further out, but it's really at that last few percentage points of the frame that the Tamron looks sharper in the corner than the Otis lens. Now, one thing I do want you to note here that you're going to find it does play a part in this comparison is that the Sigma is the shortest of all these lenses. And so as a result, like if you look down here, you can see more of this area showing on the Sigma than you do on the Tamron. But if we look at this other side also, this square here, you're seeing less of it on the Tamron than you are on the Sigma. And so the Tamron is on the long side. It's the longest of these focal lengths, and the Sigma is the shortest, with the Otis and the Canon being roughly equal. So in terms of our comparison here, center of the frame performance, it might in the most slight degree favor the Sigma, but I think it's a splitting hairs. I think they're basically equal center of the frame. Moving off to the very edge of the frame, I'm going to give a very slight edge to the Sigma, which looks just a little bit better right off towards the edge of the frame compared with the actual Tamron lens. Other side of the frame, it's close. I think maybe the Tamron's a little bit better on the right side. And so anyway, just note that the Sigma and the Tamron lenses, they are roughly equal in terms of resolution at wide apertures. Now, one final comparison at f2.8, and this is as far as I'll go for sake of time, we see that the Canon and the Tamron lenses are very, very similar here in the center of the frame, and there's not really enough advantage there for me to call for either lens. moving off to the edge of the frame. The Canon has improved considerably, and so now it's pretty close to the performance of the Tamron f2.8. Both of these lenses are delivering a really strong kind of across the frame performance here. And so I think that the Tamron, if anything, it has only an edge in maybe a little bit of contrast at the edges of the frame, and you can see here, you know, a little bit of advantage there, but the difference is not significant. Strong performance from both lenses. So comparing the Sigma and the Otis lens, we're going to find here, center of the frame, that, you know, once again, it's not a huge advantage, but it's pretty easy to call the win for the Otis. The Otis just has superior contrast, and so as a result, the textures, they look more crisp, while if, you know, comparing them side by side, they look a little bit more veiled on the Sigma in the center of the frame. And moving off to the edge of the frame, and now both lenses at the very edge of the frame are roughly similar. If anything, maybe the Zeiss, its superior contrast shows up a little bit more here. At this point, the Otis is delivering, you know, well, best performance in the world, basically. And so it's hard to compete with that. Sigma's doing a pretty credible job on a lot of levels. Comparing the Tamron with the Otis lens here, we find that in the center of the frame, it's kind of the same stories with the Sigma. You know, the superior micro contrast of the Zeiss is there. Again, for a lens that costs so little compared to the Zeiss, this is a strong performance, but at the same time, the Zeiss is the winner, center of the frame, and there's no question about that. And I would say at the very edge of the frame, other than that final maybe 1% where the Tamron is really consistent, I would say that the Zeiss is the winner also in terms of contrast and resolution throughout a lot of the frame. The Otis is the sharper lens of the two, which again is not particularly surprising, but what is surprising is how well the Tamron holds up. Now, if we compare the Sigma and the Tamron lenses, center of the frame, they're close. I mean, very close. I think there might be a hair contrast edge for the Sigma compared to the Tamron. It's not highly distinguishable, let's just say. Edge performance, again, is very, very similar, but I'm going to give, you know, a fraction of an edge to the Sigma at this on the left side. On the right side, the Tamron seems to be kind of the same thing. It's just slightly sharper than the Sigma, but by that same kind of fraction of a percent. Now, looking at the Canon performance versus the Sigma, just for consistency, we'll look at this. The performance here in the center of the frame is, again, it's quite similar, and the biggest difference here is that the Canon delivers a more brightly even image corner to corner than what the Sigma does. Even with the Sigma having a little bit, you know, slower shutter speed, thus a little bit more light to work with, and so definitely the light transmission on the Canon is great. Very, very edge of the frame, just a slight edge for the Sigma. And so, you know, that gives you an idea in terms of the resolution department where all of these lenses stand. And frankly, I mean, they're certainly, the Otis is our absolute winner, and then kind of the Tamron and the Sigma vying there. And Canon is behind them, but as you've seen in this comparison, it's really not by any kind of significant margin. And these are the best 85mm lenses, you know, in the class. And so, you know, it's nothing to hang your head over. So as we can see, the absolute winner when it comes to top resolution where it matters the most, which is in the center of the frame, is without a question the Zeiss Otis lens. And it is better than all the other lenses. They're all exceptional lenses, but in a real-world application, the Otis is going to deliver the sharpest center of the frame image, and of course is very close, other than we saw that tiny fraction at the edge of the frame where some of the others give a better performance. Now, we saw that the Tamron and the Sigma are extremely close at equivalent apertures, but I'm going to give a very slight edge to the Sigma simply because it allows you to achieve incredible resolution there. even at a wider f1.4 aperture. And we saw that there's some give and take between these two lenses, and to be fair, they're really more similar than they are different. But just note that it's kind of a two-way tie for second between the Tamron and the Sigma. We saw that the Canon is slightly behind the other three competitors, but frankly, it's not by a huge margin. The Canon lens has a little bit less contrast than the other three, but again, I do want to remind you that it actually has as much, if not more, contrast than the 85 f1.2L Mark II lens. And so note that high contrast in a portrait lens isn't always necessarily what you're looking for. Now, in our second part of the series, we're going to look at how the other pieces of the puzzle fit together, and to help you to give a conclusion when it comes to this. Today I can declare a winner in terms of resolution. I'm just looking at the metrics here, and so I mean I can certainly declare safely the Zeiss Otis 85mm f1.2 or f1.4 I should say as our tops here, with the Tamron and the Sigma close behind that, and then the Canon also close behind that. All of these lenses, bottom line, are very, very sharp lenses that are going to deliver pretty exceptional resolution performances. And so we can definitely see that from our comparison today. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series, and we're going to look a little bit closer at some other metrics, flare resistance, chromatic aberration, even a little bit further look at the focal length, and then how all of that plays out at the bokeh quality, which is a huge thing. We'll also look at some facial rendering and see how each one of these lenses does with that. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you'll look in my description down below, you can find buying links to each one of these lenses, so you can make a choice from there if you would like. And of course, you can follow me on social media, become one of my patrons. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching today. Have a great day.